There's a lot of hiring authorities in construction who are hiring based on three things. One, their gut, 2 years of experience the candidate has, and three, where the candidate's coming from or their corporate pedigree in some sense. And a lot of hiring authorities extrapolate on how they feel about the candidate, which is important, where they're coming from in those years of experience to develop a heuristic about whether or not they think the candidate will be successful. And this is not entirely flawed. There's some legitimate thought process going into this, right? How you feel about the candidate can give you a sense of emotional intelligence, a sense of how this might be to work with this person. The company that they come from may have some value in terms of if you know their process is comprehensive. And the years of experience can be a proxy for competence. But I want to propose to you that there's an incredible number of hiring mistakes made using these three heuristics because gut feel, you're evaluating a candidate in a very controlled environment. Candidates are trying to show up well. You're not seeing them under pressure, and not getting into the weeds of how they do the job and how you do the job and setting those expectations is leaving an incredible area of ambiguity that you may painfully discover when it comes time to hire and work with the person. Years of experience can be similar, right? We assume that it means a level of competence, but actually what it means is it could be a level of mediocrity in a mediocre organization. It could mean that they are extremely entrenched in doing things a very different way and with a different philosophy and different mindset than your organization operates with. And the company that they're coming from, the pedigree there might communicate value, but I'll tell you what companies operate so differently. Even companies who do exactly the same kind of work have very different cultures, leadership, communication styles, processes. They're all different. And so a lot of times hiring authorities don't understand the level of risk and ambiguity that's hiding in these details. And so you might be wondering at this point, TJ, what do I do about this? And the answer is interview to the job description. You put a bunch of time into putting together your mission, vision, values, and job description. And the question is simply applying that infrastructure to your interview process in a disciplined manner, in the same sense that you understand that disciplined project management is important to running a good construction project. Disciplined interviewing is extremely important for good, engaged, high quality, high resolution interviewing. And so I would suggest to you that if you get to the end of an interview process and you can't run through a comprehensive list showing alignment and misalignment with how you do the job, what your expectations are, you haven't done a good job of interviewing. And what that outcome should be is, in a sense, a punch list. So when our clients work with us, when they go to an interview, they get two punch lists, a punch list with the job description requirements and the core value requirements for alignment with the company. And if we're not hitting those punch list items, there's real risk, real ambiguity in the hiring process. And this is why things go south. And this is a responsibility on the hiring authorities. So the second mistake we see people make, hiring authorities, and I think in a well-intentioned, sincere way, this isn't malicious, but they blame the candidate. They blame the candidate for not being who they thought they were. And the fact is they just simply didn't interview at a high level of resolution, at a high level of depth. And they didn't ask the questions. And how else was the candidate supposed to, let them know about these things? They didn't do due diligence. I mean, it's the same way with construction projects. You take a bad project, a bad client, right? Whose fault is that? And so I'm sharing this with zeal for high quality, high resolution interviewing to the job description, disciplined, where people are accountable for real decisions and observations and critiques, questions in the interview process. And we're developing all that data, we're retaining that data, we're studying that data, we're looking for alignment, and we're taking accountability that when we hire somebody, we have assessed that they are fit for the organization. And now that we've hired them, we're committed to making this successful. And too often what I'm seeing is we phone in the interview process, we start the onboarding process, we discover new things, and then we have to go through a process of questioning our judgment in the hiring process. What did we miss? Why did we miss this? Did the candidate hide this from us? And a lot of hires go south this way, and it's entirely preventable. Disciplined hiring, project management, interviewing lanes, feedback, prep, detailed questions. Walk me through your process. This is how our process works. Setting expectations, analyzing the data, and holding interviewers accountable for what kind of assessments are we making. Interviewing is not a social endeavor, and gut does play a factor. Your gut will tell you things that your brain hasn't figured out how to articulate. But it's your job as an interviewer to convert those gut feelings into real insight and real observation. And this is how you do it. Interview to the job description, interview the core values, interview to the mission statement, and be detailed. This takes time. This takes energy. This takes upfront investment in prep, in debrief. This is not something that you can phone in. But if you do this, you mitigate risk across the board at every step. And you're still going to have mistakes. But the cool thing about developing this data is then you can learn from your mistakes. You can recognize here was the gap in the interview process. This is how we can close that gap. This is what we can do with that data. And you can constantly get better and better and better. And this is a competitive advantage for your organization because it shows respect to the people that you hire. It's their career. It's their life. It's their time with their kids. They don't need this chaos in their life. They don't need to join a company who hasn't properly assessed the fit. You are 85% in charge of the decision to hire someone. They don't know your organization. You know your organization. So you have to assess the candidate at a high quality level and help the candidate assess you so that both parties can be committed to a successful outcome together. There's one more thing I forgot to say, and that is you can do a lot of good recruiting work that comes to nothing because of bad interviewing. We can find good candidates, but because of misaligned expectations or improper due diligence, it can fall apart in the interview stage. And there's 4 types of risk to mitigate. There's environmental risk inside the company. This has to do with leadership quality. It has to do with culture. It has to do with how the company handles stress, team dynamics, team cohesion, communication patterns, etc. Then you've got candidate risk. You need quality candidates who have aligned abilities. That's something that your recruiter can and should be working on. And then you've got interviewing risk. What's the level of precision that we are interviewing at? Your recruiter should be helping you with this. This is something that we help our clients with extensively. And then you've got onboarding and retention risk, which is related to the environmental risk because people often don't quit companies, they quit leaders. And so being very, very thoughtful about these 4 risk categories is incredibly important as you think about your interviewing process, because interviewing is fundamentally about reducing risk. And so the level of precision that you're interviewing at is the level of risk reduction that you're doing in this process. How good are you building commitment and loyalty with a candidate? How good are you building clarity on where they're going to need support or where they're going to be a shoe-in the role? What's the leadership relationship dynamics going to be with this candidate? Where are we going to need to invest emotionally in supporting this person? And then what does that onboarding process look like? What does that retention process look like? What are their goals? What are the motivations? How can we help this person be successful in their goals so that we can be successful in our goals? Interviewing is simple relationship development. This is not different than meeting someone at a coffee shop, except the stakes are higher. And so there's a lot of pressure being put on these 3 to 7 hours of time that interviewing teams put into an interview process, and you need to get as much risk reduction done as possible in that time. Expand that by number of interviewers, and it's very easy for a company to be spending dozens and dozens of hours in your interviewing process. And so I'd propose to you, if your interviewing process isn't creating high resolution observations and conclusions, you're probably wasting a lot of time in the interview process, probably relying too much on gut and not enough on interviewing skill and interviewing perceptiveness to develop real insight. Let's talk about one last thing. Let's talk about cost. Cost to your organization financially, to your mission, to your morale. High quality, high resolution interviewing is absolutely foundational to making sure that the people who join your organization are aligned on the mission. And if you're hiring people who have experience, but they don't really understand your core values, they don't understand how those core values show up under pressure, under stress, or what your mission is and why your company exists and why they would want to be a part of that mission. There's a lot of risk that in some sense they may be an industry professional that can do the job in some sense, but they're not aligned. And so think about the process that you go through for the whole interview process. You got all your interviews time. What's the value of their time in direct cost? Just salary and benefits, right? But then think about the opportunity cost of those people are not working on billing operations, solving client problems. Usually clients conclude that that's a pretty high cost. Interviewing is expensive. And so you really need to be getting maximum value from the time that your team is spending in interviews. But then look at the cost of a mishire, right? If you have a recruiting fee involved, there's that risk. There's the onboarding time that you've spent, the team morale, the clarity or morale around what is the job? Do we really know how to interview and hire for this job? You may have customer issues. If the customer sees the turnover and experiences that, that can impact your relationship with them. And then there's just friction on the mission where people are having to spend time and attention on something that's not core to the mission that your business is there to do. And so think about the consequence of low precision interviewing and the cost to your organization, to your people, to the candidate who joins, right? Where they want to improve their life with this job change, and they don't necessarily have all the information that you have in order to make sure that that's a good fit. So think about the cost to all the parties involved, the time, the money, the mission, etc.